Right, so the story with this base is that a student was walking through a church and ran into a wooden pew. You can see there are multiple cracks and pieces missing. The first tool I'm going to need is this file down butter knife. I used a belt sander to shave it down. It's going to be very important for taking off the top plate. I need to take the top plate off because this crack is so extensive and it covers such a large area that I'm going to have to put some reinforcement on the inside of the ribs. So what I'm doing here is I'm finding a weak spot. Most top plate seams have a weak spot somewhere, but it turns out this base doesn't, so I need to create my own. This is a simple heat gun. It costs $20 or $30, I don't remember. But if your instrument was made the right way, it's put together with hide glue, which comes from animal connective tissue, and it's extremely strong unless you heat it up. And this is why you don't leave your instrument in a hot car. You don't want to burn any of the wood, so never keep the heat gun pointed at any place for longer than a few seconds. Alright, looks like I've found a weak spot here on this corner. I'm able to put my putty knife in just a couple millimeters, and I'm going to start hammering very gently along the length of the seam. If I encounter any resistance, I'm going to stop and heat it up again. I'm going to have to use my heat gun along basically the entire length of this seam. And it's really important to be patient when you're doing this. It's not fun to crack a top plate, especially if it's not your own. Alright, so I'm going to keep trying to get water into the seam, heating it up, looking for weak spots, trying to get it off and make sure it's just nice and easy. So I've made some progress. I'm moving on to other parts of the plate. The area by the neck block is maybe one of the most dangerous places to start trying to remove the top plate. It's very easy to cause splintering. There's a big area of the plate that is glued underneath the fingerboard, and I need to just remove it very carefully. So this whole process ends up taking about 60 to 90 minutes. I wasn't keeping track exactly, but it's somewhere in that range. Alright, this is me getting the knife out, not in, just a note. So the top plate is now pretty much ready to go. There's a little resistance by the neck block, and I'm going to pull very, very gently. And success. So you can see I did cause a little bit of splintering right here. No big deal, it'll glue back together nicely, and there's some other little tiny splinters as well. Alright, so let's look at the crack from the inside. There's a missing piece. I'm going to try and put it back together the best I can, and just see how well everything fits. Then I'm just going to start gluing pieces together with this room temperature liquid hide glue. It's definitely not the final product. I just need things roughly where I want them to be. Yeah, I'm definitely going to use some hot hide glue later on using a pot, but for now I just need these things in place. And I'm using this liquid hide glue because it has a slower curing time, and I can still move things around even, 30 minutes later after I've put it in place. Alright, so here's a piece of an old base rib. Terrible wood, but it makes for a good tool. And then I've got this chipboard stuff from Home Depot that's flexible but also really hard. And I'm going to use this to force the rib and all those pieces of wood into shape. I'm going to wipe away this excess glue. And And then I'm going to use parchment paper as a barrier. After the glue is fully set, the parchment paper will still come right off. It doesn't bond to it very well, so it's a great barrier when you're clamping things like this. I've got this in place. I'm using my throat clamps. "24 hours later, I'm going to take off all the clamps and parchment paper and see how it's going. See how it looks so far. Alright, looks pretty lined up that way. Now I'm going to put some spool clamps on the ribs to add some vertical pressure. I need those cracks to stay tight vertically as I get ready to put some linen on the inside of the rib. To reinforce the ribs, I'm going to put strips of linen along the inside and soak them completely in hide glue. Once the glue sets, the linen will harden and it'll behave like a thin sheet of wood. Again, I'm using room temperature liquid hide glue because this whole assembly took quite a while to put together, and liquid hide glue takes longer to set. And here's something like 24 hours later, taking off all the clamps, seeing how everything's turned out so far. Now the glue inside the linen is still not fully cured, but exposing it to the air will speed this up. Here I'm just using an unscented wet wipe to wipe away some of the excess hide glue. Okay, so right here I think I'm forcing a little tiny piece of wood into place that didn't line up quite right, and I used a little drop of super glue to help. And here's my hot hide glue inside an old salsa jar surrounded by water on the outside of the jar. I'm going to use this glue to put the top back on, so here I am painting it on. You have to act pretty fast because hot hide glue sets a lot more quickly than room temperature liquid hide glue. So here I am painting on the glue to every possible surface that I can. Now it's time to put on the spool clamps to add vertical pressure and keep that plate in place. You want it clamped pretty tight, not because it needs a lot of pressure, but because you want the layer of glue to be extremely thin. That's how it cures the best, and that's how it becomes really strong. Here's where it gets painful. I'm going to have to destroy some of this varnish in order to sand this surface completely smooth and flat. It's going to end up looking better though than if I had just tried to preserve the varnish and left some bumpy, uneven cracks on the side of the base. I'm using 120 grit sandpaper here and a hard wooden sanding block to force the surface to go flat. Gonna collect some of the sanding dust to use for a filler mix. Then I'm gonna mix in some hot hide glue in a 1-to-1 ratio with the sanding dust. So after some preliminary sanding, I'm going to use this filler to patch up some holes and cracks that I've noticed. After 12 to 24 hours, the filler will harden and then you can just sand it smooth. Adding some more filler again because I saw some tiny little holes. I'm going to sand it with 120 grit and then 220 grit and then 400 grit. I need this to be very smooth and very flat. Once I get to 400 grit, I'm going to stop using sanding blocks and just use my fingers instead. And here's 800 grit. As the grit number gets higher, the pressure that I use with my hand gets less and less. So now here's 1500 and I'm just going to be very light with this. So there it is, smooth and wiped off, and now it's ready to be varnished. I'm going to use shellac mixed with RIT dye. I'm probably going to get some death threats from luthiers over this, but it works. My first couple layers on the bottom coat are going to be more dye than shellac, and then as I build up layers, it's going to be more shellac than dye. Something that I try to do is to never go over the same spot more than one time. If there's something that you don't like, just wait till the next coat. So here's the final coat. Each coat took about an hour to dry, so the whole process takes quite a while. I'm not going to try and make it any darker because it's going to make the existing varnish even darker around the borders, and I don't want that. Time to reset the sound post. Now I'm replacing the strings in the tailpiece and the end pin. And here's the bridge. Just kidding, wrong bridge. Now I understand how doctors cut off the wrong leg sometimes. And now I'm putting the sound post exactly where it was before. I used a charcoal pencil to mark where it was before I took the bridge off. And now it's time to play. It's crazy though, even after all that work, I still can't get this bass to play in tune.